How many YouTube videos have you clicked on that promise that you're gonna improve your photography with this one thing, or like 5 tips or anything like that? Well, this video is gonna be a little bit different from what a lot of those videos talk about, because I'm gonna be going over something that I specifically teach in my one-on-one lessons, whether it's virtually or in-person lessons, which they're coming soon to my website. You can DM me on Instagram if you want one-on-one lessons. But anyways, I was talking with a student this past week. About an hour into our lesson, she was obviously getting frustrated. You know, I'm trying different ways to tell her, you know, shoot wide shots, shoot medium shots, shoot, you know, extreme close-ups. And it really dawned on me that me being someone who I feel like I kind of always had that eye for it. I've always been drawn to shadows and contrast, and always have kind of looked for it. And she's somebody who had never done anything like that. Like, she couldn't see the shadows on the subject that we were shooting, which were her horses. And you know, to me, it being so obvious, like, I'm like, oh yeah, you know, look at the nose, look at the muscular structure on the horse's face, underneath the jaw, you know. And I ended up picking up rocks and showing her shadows on rocks, on plants, on the barn, inside the barn, you know, light coming in through the windows. I took her everywhere and I showed her everything I possibly could, as well as some of the photos that I'm gonna go over with you today on what to look for and build that photographer's eye, so that you can tell a better story and a more contrasting story with light that speaks about your subject to the viewers who are looking at your photos. And that's really what we're doing as photographers, right? We are taking photos and we want that photo to tell a story to whoever's, you know, watching it. Otherwise, we're just people with cameras taking snapshots of things. So let's go ahead and jump into the first thing that I want to talk about is telling a story in sequences. So you have different types of shots that you can get on one subject. You have in an establishing shot, a medium shot, and then you have close-up shots. So if we look at this photo right here of the mountains, this is something that would be possibly considered an establishing shot. It was shot far enough away that you understand that it's mountains and a forest. Now, it's not a landscape photo by orientation, and it's not an extreme wide shot, but it was shot, you know, at 24 millimeters, overlooking the rolling hills in the Appalachian Mountains. And then if you wanted to do a medium shot, you have medium shots would be something like this elk here. You have the majority of the elk in focus. You can tell that we have now come underneath the tree canopy and we are looking at the elk. Then you have close-ups, which would be like this chicken of the forest mushroom, or the pine cones and pine needles of this tree. So those are your sequences of photos that you would take when you're out and about, if you're doing both landscape and wildlife photography, that would tell a story about that entire landscape. These being shot all within the same region, tell the story of that region, right? Now, you could do this with an animal by itself. You could take a photo of the elk from far away grazing, and then you can move into the medium shot that I just showed you. And then you could do something like an extreme close-up, which would be if I take this medium shot and just, you know, zoom in to see its really blurry eye. But let's even do like 50%. Like, this would be considered, you know, a close-up, coming in and getting the detail of the antlers, the detail of the elk's coat being all wet, having that detail in the eye. And when you have the storytelling element down of being able to get your wide shot, medium shot, close-up shots, and then you have extreme close-ups, cutaways, you know, cut-ins, things like that, which are mostly used in filming, but you can actually bring them into photography to tell a photo story. And that's a little tip for you, just to get creative and look at your environment, wherever you're shooting or whatever subject you're shooting, as a whole, and tell the whole story. Now, enough with the storytelling aspect. Let's get into what I really wanted to talk about, which is looking for shadows. All right. There's a lot of planning that goes into a shoot. If you're a beginner and you're wondering how people get the photos with good contrast and lighting and all that, well, there's apps like Photo Pills that tell you when the sun is setting, what the lighting's going to be. Constantly looking at the weather, looking at precipitation levels, looking at the dew point to see whether or not there's going to be fog. So looking at weather patterns, looking at what the position of the sun or the moon, or if you're shooting astrophotography, where the Milky Way is going to be and when at what times. There's a lot of research that goes into this, into what type of lighting you're wanting and what type of atmosphere you're wanting in your photo too. So I'm going to start off by showing you what technically we try and steer away from, which is flat lighting. Could I make this into a less flat image? Sure, but the sun was pretty high up already, and you can see by the shadows underneath the tree branches here, the shadow direction of the shadow here. So the sun, you can tell, is coming from this area, coming down, casting this long shadow, and you have this shadow underneath here. Not the greatest side lighting, meaning that the light would be coming from somewhere over here like it is at golden hour, where you get nice split lighting. But it's getting to a point where if the sun was coming down from above, you would have really harsh contrast, and even the shadows on this image particularly are pretty sharp, meaning that there's not a nice soft gradient between them. Like you can see a very fine edge where the shadows meet the highlights. So let's just walk through these examples like one by one, and I promise I'm gonna be quick about it. I just wanna drive the point home and give you as many examples as possible so that this makes sense and so that you start seeing it. And then after this, I'm gonna give you one final tip on how you can kind of build up to seeing this in your day-to-day life and when you're out on set shooting your subject, whether you're shooting portraits or you're doing wildlife or you're doing landscape photography, any type of nature photography. Image number one, chicken of the forest. When I'm walking around, I am looking at where light is coming in through the tree canopy and where it's hitting on the ground, and I'm looking for unique characteristics that you would only find in that forest. Who else is gonna see it? Am I gonna be the only person to ever see this particular mushroom in that particular area? Is this something that's native to the region that I'm currently in? Like, those are the things that I'm thinking about in regards to telling its story. So I see light coming in from up here. You can see how it's brighter up here, darker down here. So good contrast there. And of course you have this down tree that's been dead for quite some time, and you got some fungus growing on it, and you have this beautiful moss, and you have a lot of different textures. The textures of the tree branches down here and the sticks and the dead leaves and the shadows, all the different textures of the leaves of the, I don't know if they're called leaves, but on the edges or the ribbing of the mushroom, the textures of the wood here, and then the textures of the moss. I could have sat there and chose a different angle, but I moved around my subject with my camera, kind of looking to see where the lighting is hitting. And I chose this angle because I wanted the tree going through. I wanted the way that the lighting was hitting the mushrooms from this angle, getting the three different tiers of mushrooms, and just, this is the composition where I felt the contrast, the shadows and the light were the best. And again, contrast being your blacks, your shadows, your midtones, your extreme highlights here, and your regular highlights. So contrast is the distinction between all of those, them working in harmony to tell an aesthetically pleasing story. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other ways, but let's move on to number two. Again, choosing this image here, you have good side lighting because you can see the shadow is right here on the sides of the pine cones, and the side of the pine tree itself. And even in the background, you have these particular branches. You have the light coming in because this, I believe, was a little bit higher up, so the lighting's hitting it where this was casting a little bit more shadow. But just looking at the way that the sun is hitting your subject, is it too harsh? Are you positioning yourself in a way where you're getting those different layers of contrast through your image? This is just a raw image that I've yet to play around with of top down of ferns, but you can see all the different layers, and once this is edited, there'd be a lot of contrast in it. And then we already looked at this one. This isn't my full edited version of this photo, but you can see, again, not like the best example of good lighting, but you have a good amount of contrast between our subject being dark and our background being light, being lit up. And it's not lit up to the point where it's too much. And then another one of the elk, the light coming from up here, cutting down, and then creating these beautiful highlights of the wet fur of this elk as it's drinking the water. And now I normally don't like to shoot water with my 600mm because I don't have ND filters or polarizer for it, and the reflections tend to be too distracting in my opinion. But there's enough cloud cover to make it, to dim them out, and again, the brightness of the water and contrasts with the darkness of the elk, and then of course the texture of its fur, the texture of its antlers, and the background was dark enough. Now I would like if this tree wasn't here, because if it was all green, these antlers would really stand out. Now one of my favorite photos of this year is this fox that just turned and looked right into the sun as the sun was just about to drop below the horizon. The sun is about right here. I mean, you can see the light coming in, and look at all this beautiful contrast. Dark, light, midtones, shadows, dark, midtones, shadows, little highlight there, midtones, shadows, blacks, and the fur, all that texture. The reason that texture pops is because of the contrast, the way that the lighting on this fox, and of course the things I did in post-production to make it stand out. It makes it seem like for me, I look at that, I'm like, man, I just want to pet the fox. Like, it's just gorgeous to me. And that's because you have that balance of light, midtones, and blacks. And these are the things that you, again, are wanting to look for. I didn't just sit down and snap a photo. I positioned myself purposefully with that tree in the background, looking for what is in my background and what can I use as contrast between my subject and the background, and sometimes the foreground as well. Kind of the same thing, you got this barred owl here looking into the sun setting with this the beautiful orange, purplish, bluish light coming in and just highlighting the face of this barred owl. Again, very dark around the edges here where the sun is not touching the very thick bush that I was in, and just the texture of the barred owl, the texture of the tree, and everything just really standing out against our background here and our owl itself. Another fox image, same, very similar thing here. Here you have complementary colors with the greens and the reds and the blues and the oranges, the light coming in again, cutting in through its eyes, beautiful lighting between with the bokeh in the background and the contrast between the light, mid, and black and shadowed bokeh. And then again, the fur. Everything in this photo to me just really speaks good lighting, good contrast, and being patient enough to wait for that moment. Again, something similar, but this photo, you could see the sun was a little bit higher up, casting somewhat harsher shadows because we don't again have that nice side light. But I really liked this photo because again, you can, well, not again, but it's the osprey's eyes really stand out. You see the texture here, the texture of its wings here, the texture of the tree branch, and then of course, like just the light coming in, highlighting the fins of the fish that it's eating, and get you being able to see the shimmer of the blood. Very similar barred owl as the last one, sun cutting in between these two trees, just lighting enough of the barred owl up to create, to draw your attention right to the subject and the edges of the photo, being there, being present, adding to the image, but not having it completely flat. The image almost looks three-dimensional like the Fox one. This was a midday shot, and normally I don't shoot midday, but I didn't want to leave. The eagles were being super active, and this eagle was in flight, and you could see it. The eagle was hunting, because eagles, they will fly sideways like this, and they will move their head, constantly keeping an eye on whatever prey. And again, just the lighting from the sun as it tilted at this 45-degree angle, the sun coming through the bottom of the wings, lighting up this whole side and creating a nice contrast. And then the beautiful complementary colors of the orange and the yellows on this bald eagle and the blue background. So now how can you practice this stuff? Well, if you're out during sunrise, if you're out, at any time of the day, just look around you. Look at the way that the shadows are landing on certain things. Look at the shadows, especially during midday, how harsh they are. Look at the people around you, the way that the lighting hits them. Look for lighting and shadows. That is the best thing that I could tell you. Get used to seeing where shadows fall on different subjects and how certain subjects reflect light at different times of the day. This is how you train your eye to look for good lighting scenarios and what good lighting looks like and how good lighting can affect a subject that you're wanting to shoot. Secondly, I would look at other people's work, like you can go on my Instagram and look at my photos, or find artists who you want to mimic or practice on how they got those shot. Look at their photos and wonder what time of day were they probably shooting in. Try and figure out where the light was coming from. Whether it was foggy, whether it was slightly cloudy out. Try and ask yourself those questions when you're looking at someone's work, instead of just scrolling through being like, oh, that's pretty, or oh, that's cool, or whatever. Take the time to actually dive into their photo and dive into your own photos. Go out there and shoot, look at it and look at where the lighting was on your subjects. The second to last tip I'm gonna give you is spend some time and be patient with your subject. Sit there, watch them, learn the animal's behavior, or talk to the person who you're shooting and figure out what their quirks are, what their personality is. Those are what makes your subject special. Every animal, every person that you shoot has their own characteristics and their own reason that animal or that person or your subject or even landscape is special. So get to know that. Look for what is unique to the environment that I'm in and the subject I'm shooting. And you'll start taking pictures of those unique things, and then you'll start thinking about the lighting hitting those unique things. And over time, you'll start building up and you'll start seeing these things everywhere. It'll completely change the way that you see the world. Lastly, if you want to improve the editing process to make these photos stand out, be sure to check out this video next.